Hi everyone, I'm Dan from JazzComposersPresent.com, an online space where composers, musicians, and listeners come together to celebrate the music we love. Our November events were fantastic. We presented Composer Spotlights featuring Darcy James Argue and Erica Seguine, a group lesson with Jim McNeely, our November Roundtable with special guests Rich DeRosa and Pete McGinnis, and listening sessions with Tara Davidson and Alex Goodman. The presenting artists gave incredible insight into their creative process, 12-tone technique, motivic development, and other great topics. The live Q&As with the community were equally engaging. December's events are off to a fantastic start, and our upcoming events lineup is incredibly exciting. Visit our website to see our entire upcoming events calendar. All our live streams stay in the past event archive for 60 days. Become a Premier Tier member today to access the archive and participate in our upcoming live streamed events. This highlights video will provide a taste of what our full-length events have to offer. Thank you for supporting JazzComposersPresent.com.
So I'm excited to go over some of the 12-tone techniques that I used in Real Enemies with you guys in some detail. So we're going to be talking about Chapter 0, which is called You Are Here, and then we'll talk about Chapter 1, which is The Enemy Within. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I constructed the row for this piece. Real Enemies is a 12-tone piece. And I figured if I'm writing a piece about conspiracy theories, then it has to be 12-tone, otherwise I'm doing it wrong. And so the 12-tone nature of the piece, the row itself, is embedded into every level of this piece, and it's 80 minutes long. So I knew that I had to design a row that I would be happy with at the end of writing 80 minutes worth of music. So let's take a look first at the row that I came up with for Real Enemies. So you can see here are the 4 basic row forms. If you guys are familiar with 12-tone composition, you're probably familiar with these 4 basic forms. First, we have what's called the prime form, and this is the form of the row in which you first encounter it. This is the first sound we hear is the prime form of the row, and it sounds like this. So you'll notice it begins with a tritone because, again, if I'm writing a piece about conspiracy theories and it doesn't start with a tritone, then I'm doing it wrong. It's Diabolus in Musica. It's irresistible. This is a row that has some semitones in it for potential dissonance, but also some consonant intervals like these major thirds and then another semitone and then another major third. There's another tritone that happens halfway through the row from 7 to 8, the 7th to the 8th notes of the row. We get another tritone, and in fact it's the same 3 notes that begin the row are also a transposition of them are used in row positions 7, 8, and 9. And then it closes again with a major third and a minor second at the end of the row. And what I like about this row, and I found many different possibilities. I tried out many different rows on for size, but what I liked about this row was one that it seemed to be a satisfying melody in and of itself. So I use it melodically quite a bit during the piece, but that also it helped to generate chords that sounded jazz adjacent. So stuff like this can then be arranged in a way. For instance, if I take these notes up an octave, if I take the bottom of the E flat up the octave, that's a chord that has jazz connotations. You know, that could easily be some kind of dominant 13, flat 9, sharp 9 kind of sound. It's in that universe. We have our tonic vamp for our 1 chord. And then for the theme on top of it, I ended up using the inverted form of the row. And I chose to use, I chose to carve the row up into tetrachords, into groups of 4 pitches, and move around freely within those 4 pitches, because I already did a very strict presentation of the row in the piano part, in the piano ostinato. But for the melody, I wanted a little more liberation, the ability to move within each 4-note tetrachord as if it was a cell, as if the order within that tetrachord doesn't matter as long as I hit all 4 pitches before moving on to the next tetrachord. I allowed myself the ability to repeat notes, to move not in strict row order within those. And again, that's something that many 12-tone composers have done, is carve it up into groups of 4, and then just allow yourself a little bit more liberty within that group of 4 pitches. So for the melody, we have... And you can see that we start with the first note of the row, but then we go directly to the 3rd note of the row. We circle back to the 2nd, then we hit the 4th, and then we return to the 1st. So that melody seemed particularly satisfying over the A chromaticness in the piano part. If we can move to the next slide. Now over this sort of G bass, I moved on to the 2nd tetrachord of that row form, and we start on the 5th note, which is the beginning of the 2nd tetrachord. Go to the 6th note, back to the 5th, little decoration of the 7th note, and then back to the 5th. And then landing on this C, this felt very incomplete to me. It felt like the phrase hadn't finished. But luckily, the first note of the 3rd tetrachord, this B natural, was available to me, and that felt like it finished the phrase. So the arrangement of the tetrachords doesn't have to line up perfectly with the arrangement of the phrase. So this phrase begins with the 2nd tetrachord. I hit all of the notes of the 2nd tetrachord, so I'm allowed to move on, and then I just move on to the 3rd tetrachord before the end of the phrase, allowing myself a musically satisfying completion of that gesture. The same melodic material and re-rhythmizing it. I'm using the rows in a different way in chapter 1, but the same basic principle of having the bass line being row-based, having the harmonies, the supporting harmonies being row-based, and having the melody being row-based, and being able to move around a little bit within the row, going back and forth, not being tied to strict row order every time, but being able to phrase within the row to drop back 2 spots and then continue forward, allowing myself that freedom then allows me to feel like I'm just putting my thumb on the scale a little bit more as a composer. So let's take a look at how this all looked in the Real Enemies film that we came out with last year. You're going to see all of The Enemy Within in its entirety. So we just went through the entire theme, and you'll hear that. You'll hear John Ellis's absolutely blazing solo, and then you'll hear the shout chorus, and then at the very end, you're going to hear a 12-tone chord, the first full 12-tone chord that the whole band plays during this piece. They build up gradually during the final few seconds of this piece. So keep an ear out for that. This is The Enemy Within.
So a lot of my favorite composers and a lot of their works, a lot of my favorite works, there's always like a sense of struggle, or often a sense of struggle with something, whether it's personal or external or musical or social or environmental. And through that struggle, there's usually a discovery of at least something that hasn't quite existed before, or something new, or a fresh new way of putting something together. And I find that leads to very personal story, which mix of intellect and emotion. And that, I feel, takes a lot of courage. I'm going to quickly go over this. There's, for me, like 6 stages. So there's intention, what your heart has always wanted to say, that light bulb moment for an idea. Or, and I got this from Jim, that famous playing what if. And then there's planning. So if you have like that idea or that kind of moment, it's like, I want to write a piece about this, then you go into planning. And that is listening, immersing yourself in that world, sketching. I always carry like small notebooks, and I kind of sketch ideas down and write words and draw pictures. writing verbally how you might even approach that piece. So then after you plan, you kind of get into attempting to write the piece. And there's, at least for me, there's a lot of struggle, a lot. So diving in for the first time on the page, digging in, deleting a lot of measures. I probably delete more measures than I actually put into a piece. Like I've kind of started to get more comfortable tossing out like 72 bars at any time. So it's still painful a little bit, but that's part of the process. And then a lot of times there's frustration, not getting your desired outcome, coming short, forcing music on the page, a lot of shoulds. I mean, that kind of sounds like therapy a little bit. Go about your shoulds. You gotta, get rid of the shoulds. And I must always compose in a certain way. And then hopefully either you go backwards and you go attempt and you kind of struggle, or usually there's a moment where if you go down the list, there's letting go and trust. So it's patience, time, not forcing the process, putting the project aside, writing something else, allowing yourself to take a new direction, jumping off the cliff, and trusting, hopefully, your own intuition. I find that trusting intuition for anything has been probably one of the most helpful things that I can do for myself, both in life and in music. And then hopefully then that leads down to a completed piece or creation. But creation, really, it's every step is creation. So maybe it's more manifestation, although that kind of sounds a little woo. So I don't almost want to use that term too much, but I guess it's more like manifestation. So, and that's more of a culmination, not only of like the craft that you put into it, but it's also a culmination of your experiences, past works you've written, the sketches you discarded. And then of course there's always editing later on. I'm still going back and editing my pieces years later, but this is kind of where you have that finished piece. Okay, my idea was to have a single soloist at first. So, okay, this is the alto saxophone going through all this stuff, and I'm gonna have a solo section where essentially the ensemble is progressively taunting the alto saxophonist more and more and more till the alto saxophonist goes insane. So I kind of sketched out on the left side there, you can see a little bit of what my initial idea for a solo section was. And all that there, that each number you see is based on the chord progression from that part I just played. So it's kind of like this angry kind of minor key part. And so I was going to have him progressively do that and modulate. But it started not feeling right. And I was kind of really struggling with this. And I also felt that when I was writing the piece that I wasn't really developing the first part enough before we got to the solo section. So anyways, I kind of wrote on the right side there, you can kind of see I wrote some of my problems with my frustrations with this. I felt, okay, it's not developing enough. And I kind of kept going back and forth over this for weeks. And I was just really kind of like, didn't know what to do. So anyways, if we go to the next sketch now, please. So then came into, after kind of the struggling and attempting at it, I kind of had the idea, okay, what if I bring a second soloist in? So this way, too, the second soloist can introduce another section, maybe something that's a little bit more sweet, maybe more major key, maybe a little more alluring. And then that this soloist can kind of have some banter with the alto saxophone. So I picked the trumpet to kind of play sweetly against the alto saxophone, slowly, obsessively chasing the trumpet player more and more and more until lands in insanity, essentially. So those were some of my thoughts there, as you can see on the left there. And then I started kind of writing out over those next two pages kind of what I want an idea of for the progression. So either you go back and you go back to strongly, kind of attempt and something works out like in Tangoing, or sometimes you have to go to the next stage, which is like letting go and trust, I call it. And underneath that would be like patience, letting time pass, not forcing the process, putting the project aside, writing something unrelated, maybe taking a new direction, or maybe you just jump off a cliff and you go and try to do something that you haven't done before and you just go for it. But regardless, it's important to really try to trust your own intuition with it. Like I said before, it's one of the best things I think you can do as a composer or in life, is just trusting that.
I love the sax writing. I mean, it was a great surprise. I mean, it's not, you don't expect to hear a saxophone quartet a cappella in a big band chart. So that was really neat. I thought the writing was great. And one of the things I liked when listening to the entire track is how you managed to link together the contrast of these moods. You have this kind of earthy modal kind of thing, and then it gets into a wistful, pretty type harmony. I thought you really morphed well in and out of that.
Thanks. We talked about it a lot in rehearsal too, with the rhythm section, about how to accompany it, because the urge was to kind of go into it driving, because that's the vibe of the tune. So we talked about it and we worked on those contrasts. So,
what's also cool is that the listener, the average listener, probably has more, they hear more of the basic impact of the music. So when you have the floor tom going in the drums underneath do 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 da da, this whole thing, which is very kind of minor pentatonic-y with some chromatic-y things, but there's like a heaviness, not a darkness, but like a heaviness to it. And to have the floor tom accompany that was an excellent choice. I mean, that is the kind of thing the average listener responds to. So the choice that the drummer to use the floor toms, like, something like, I don't even know what, something more basic and from hundreds and thousands of years ago. It's like, it's guttural, it's visceral. And that's the kind of thing that the average listener, as advanced as our music can be, I think it's always important to not forget how would the average listener respond to our music beyond all the more complicated things we do. And I think that's another reason why this whole passage was very successful to my ears, at least.
Yeah, it's ironic too. It brings us back to the old Benny Goodman, Gene Krupa, sing, 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 right?
Right.
The tom-tom.
Right.
You know? And
Sure.
I think another thing it's really neat, certainly in the hands of John Riley, you've got a guy who's can play anything you want to write, but also like top drummers, they can give you, they're orchestrating, even if you don't know what exactly to write. So I think it's really important. I tell my students all the time, look, it's not even a matter of writing specifically, just convey what you want in English. The idea of going from a tom-tom thing, and then all of a sudden you hear John switch over to just the cymbals. And that's a really neat thing. I think sometimes, especially if composers are less aware of what goes on in a jazz rhythm section, to think of that a drummer has to play everything all the time. And it's really nice. It's kind of like, let's say, with an orchestra, and you say, well, I have to have everybody playing all the time. It's like, no, sometimes it's nice to just have the brass or the winds or just the strings. And so to partition the kit and sometimes tell the drummer, only play ambient cymbal texture. So or just play toms, play time on the tom-tom. It's a really, like you said, Pete, it has a bold, dramatic impact, whether it's loud or soft, it's intriguing.
Today, we're joined by three very talented composers who were selected to participate in today's group lesson based off their outstanding submissions. Australian composer Rochelle Scorgie, Canadian composer Alexei Ozerov, and Australian composer Minnie Hill. We're going to invite them in one by one, take a listen to an excerpt from their submitted work, and then pass it over to you, Jim, for your feedback.
Yeah, I really like this piece. One of the things that I like is some of the rhythmic stuff you're doing. And, sometimes especially when we're working with larger ensembles, there's so much focus put on voicings, and harmony. And there's some really nice rhythmic stuff that you're doing here. Especially right I printed out your score, so I'm looking. But this place at Dan, if you could flip to page 9. So this pattern that's happening in the piano, and later I think the guitar picks it up. Well, I think what's nice about what you did there is that it's not a regular pattern. You know, I mean, the thing here is it's in 5, but you're not just using a regular repeated pattern. The what the piano and what the guitar later on are doing is kind of across the bar line or blurring the bar line. So sometimes when especially when we work in odd meters, there's a tendency to just get into this pattern thing that repeats over and over again. And you're doing that in the bass. There is a repeated rhythm in the bass, but this other layer of a more fluid kind of rhythmic thing, I think, works really nicely.
Thank you.
I really like this piece, and one reason why it's a very long exposition of the melody, but you do a nice job of passing the melody around to different people or different groups of people, and so that sometimes when I'm writing something like this and I want the melody to be passed around, I think of like a visual television thing where the camera's on these 2 people here, and now the camera's on those 2 people, now the camera's on so the visual attention is shifting around according to who's playing, and so you do that really nicely here, just starting in the beginning with the flugel melody, and then you start with the flugelhorn at bar 12, which is page 3, the flugel and the guitar, and now at bar page 5, the alto saxophone joins them, and now at bar 28, which is page 7, we've got 2 different lines going. There's the low line, the tenor and the trombone, and then answered with the alto saxophone and the flugelhorn. So there's a nice variety of textures that you've got going here. One thing that I've had students do is, if they're writing for a band this size, think of all the, make a list, actually write it down. Think of all the possible combinations of instruments, that you could use just to keep the motion interesting. Like I had mentioned with Rochelle, I'm thinking sometimes about the dramatic element, and by that, I don't mean melodrama. I mean moving the plot forward, moving the storyline forward. And when you do this, where you've got different combinations all the time, and every few bars, 8 bars or so, you're introducing more melody, but with a different group of people. It helps further the plot rather than just having the same people play it over and over again. So I think that works really nicely. One of the biggest surprises to me is the way you end this.
Okay.
And when I listened to it some time ago, I kept thinking, I was listening to it without looking at the score, and I thought, all right, she's going to bring the rhythm section back in, right? Come on. And you don't. And I think it's on the one hand, it's kind of a frustrating feeling, but you've probably had the rhythm section in at the end of every other big band arrangement you've ever. So why not try it differently this time? So I like it. And you end with the whole, the sax thing accompanying Marshall, and the baritone line is really active. I like the saxophone writing here. So so what was your thinking here at the very end?
So this section was definitely influenced a lot by Marshall's writing, where I noticed he was doing a lot of these sorts of section where the horns would take both the sort of harmonic and rhythmic roles in place of the rhythm section, particularly with those bell tones and pyramids. So yeah, it was just something I really wanted to try out for this piece, and yeah, to see how it sounded.
Yeah, good. So I think it's well written, and it's a nice surprise, and it's unexpected. So I think that's a good thing.
Do you have any overall concepts or themes for this session that the audience should be aware of?
Just music I like, which is really broad. Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of music I like, so you'll see.
Yeah, I thought this was really cool because, of course, I get to see the list before we do these events, and I was like, oh, this is a fun selection of things. And we've had a few guest artists lately bring in some really cool stuff. So if you haven't checked out the last few listening sessions, highly recommend digging back into the archive.
I think it's a really good example of Brian Wilson's writing, and I think it demonstrates a few things. And there's just like a couple things compositionally that are so slick about it that kind of get me every time. But I mean, ultimately I chose it not really because of like the minutiae compositionally. I just really feel that song, and I always have. I mean, it's the kind of thing like I almost don't want to deconstruct it because it just hits me as music first. Like I don't want to, but I will.
Can we put that sentiment for a moment? Because I always think this is really interesting to talk about with other composers. But like, are you the kind of person who like has to pick everything apart to like understand it? Like when you hear something you love, is that your instinct, or is it more just to be like, you know what, that's magic, and I'm just gonna?
No,
I think
it's the first one.
Amazing. So you do have a score here, which I can bring up. I wanted to mention one quick thing before I sort of let you take off with the analysis here. The phrasing in this song is so cool.
It's so cool.
So if you get a chance to like go back and listen to the whole thing, you were going to talk a little bit more about sort of the reuse of melodic material and stuff like that. But I just think the way that the phrases sort of overlap in different ways throughout the song and get reused in different ways, it's brilliant. It's so cool. But that's it for me. I want to hear what you have to say.
I want to talk about that actually.
How have you translated some of the songwriting approaches used by some of these pop writers into your compositions in the jazz idiom?
I mean, I think the number one thing that I would talk about is just like that trusting of my ear to find what I connect to. And so that's the first step, is like I'm just like trying to find this music, and then I'm trying to internalize like whatever I find in it that I could resonate with. And so I think like in terms of like the song is very dependent on the song. Like it really goes from one to the next, and there can be these like minor things that happen once I start to deconstruct them, once I've been listening, which is the first step, to just be listening all the time and connecting to music that way as a listener and finding what you like without kind of like categorizing like what kind of music I should be listening to, being free to just check out anything. And then that's the thing, is like I'll find all sorts of different things on a composition to composition basis. It's always different. And a lot of the time why I get drawn into something to write a chart like that or transcribe it is because I just really want to figure out what's going on. So after I've done that, like things will pop out. Like for instance, the harmonic writing of Brian Wilson, or maybe that phrase structure in God Only Knows, or maybe the layering, from Ocean of Noise, or maybe the orchestrational ideas of Owen Pallett. All of these things could then hopefully be internalized by myself and could come out later when I'm writing my own stuff. And I can draw on it because I have a very personal connection to some source material.
The basic theme is I know it's simplifying it all, but I love these pieces. They moved me, and they continue to. They've made an impact on me and influenced also, my writing as well. Just consideration, different considerations that they, made me aware of towards my own writing. But yeah, basically I love them. Way shorter. Oh, so good. So good. When the first time I heard that, I think I was in tears, honestly. It was so powerful. I hadn't understood what her concept was the first time I heard it. But but felt it all so deeply. And then when I learned more about it, it's like, I'm with you. And that moment when Wayne comes in, it was like, oh yeah, it's like from another planet. It's like, it's so awesome.
Yeah, both of those entrances, he just takes over. It's great.
Yeah, it goes on. Yeah, like I did also like, whoa, that sound.
Yeah.
I mean, he's always had such a distinct sound, but also like the effect they put on it. It was yeah. I love it so much. And that's just a taste of it. Like to hear the whole work is so excellent. I hope people check it out.
Your album and the Esperanza piece had fairly developed stories or concepts as their inspiration. How do you find writing those pieces versus songs that don't have that underpinning?
The pieces that I've written that have more of more purpose behind them, whether it's an inspirational figure or concept, and I usually draw from my own life. I mean, of course, we all kind of do that. It's really helpful for me actually to just sort of jump in for the sake of composing as an exercise. I don't typically yield as satisfactory results that way, in my opinion. I'm typically not as happy when I don't have an underpinning as you posed it. Yeah.
I think as a composer, anything that sort of helps narrow in your focus from just having a completely blank canvas really helps. So having that element in there definitely helps focus your writing, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yes. For me, for sure. I mean, that little mini lesson that was put out with jazz composers about using cells, even that, like, that's a concept, right? Like looking at cells of several notes to build upon. That's also a concept. So yeah, I used to go to the keyboard more and just explore, like beginning days of composing. And the more work that I've produced, I find I need more of an underpinning to carry me forward. I guess I've lost some innocence or something. I don't know. I can't just this chord, that chord. I don't do that anymore.
Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Drop any questions, comments, or suggestions for future videos in the comment section down below. To watch our full-length events and participate in live Q&As with our presenting artists, head over to jazzcomposerspresent.com. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.